Hi, it's Emily Juries, licensed clinical mental health counselor. This episode is about coping with some of the challenging aspects of the holidays. The holidays are already upon us, but I am trying to get this in before the final couple weeks. Regardless of what you do or don't celebrate, this time of year often includes some time off from school and work, and thus family gatherings and get togethers. And with these family gatherings, less time working, and sometimes more traveling, there can be some stressful elements. This will, of course, look different for each of us, but there are a few things that I hear often with the holidays, and I also personally experience this time of year. So, three elements that I will discuss today are loss, financial stress, and family discord. As you might imagine, there's a ton of work and therapy that can be done in each of those topics individually, and I may have future episodes that elaborate further, but this episode will hopefully give you just a couple strategies to possibly help. The first one I'll discuss is loss. This might be the death or deaths of people that you care about, which might have been really recent or from many years and decades ago. This might also be other kinds of losses. Maybe there's been a separation within the family and there is grief regarding how this time of year used to look for you. Maybe there are ambiguous losses like a child that you relinquished or a friend or family member that you were separated from and haven't been able to reconnect. Maybe it's the loss of a pet. Whatever your loss might be, grief can be a challenging emotional experience and can be definitely a part of this time of year. When it comes to grief, there are a few things I want to emphasize. This looks different for everyone, meaning how you express it, what you feel in your body, how you cope with it, how long it lasts in a moment of grief, how often it comes up for you. There are no specific chronological stages of how it should look and how long you should experience it. So your grief is allowed to be however it wants to be. Here is an example of a mourner's bill of rights that helps to describe this point about grief. It's specifically referring to a death, however, they still ring true for other losses as well. I encourage you to pause the video if you want to really take your time reading through each of these. You may be thinking, isn't it a problem to a certain extent if grief or bereavement is lasting too long? That's a great question, and the simple answer is yes, but this is very much based upon your own individual experience and how much it's interfering with your daily life. So if a loved one died a year ago and you're having a really hard time being able to go to work or interact with others or take care of yourself on a consistent basis, then this is complicated grief, which means that the grief has triggered and morphed into more of a mental illness. So you will want to seek professional help to manage this. But the reality of grief is it continues to exist throughout our lives. Some losses that I experienced occurred over a decade ago, and I will still take moments to grieve those losses, particularly this time of year and during the holidays. All this is to say that grief can be a part of our holidays and celebrations, and that's okay. It likely won't be felt the entire time, and there will likely be opportunities for many other emotions like excitement and joy and gratitude. So when you notice your grief, you can let it be there. Acknowledge it. Let yourself state what you miss about that loss. Let yourself feel sad or nostalgic or angry. It's understandable, it makes sense, and it's temporary. I know that frequently people will experience grief, and then this can actually sometimes lead to gratitude of their own life and the other things that they do have. So if that's something that resonates with you, maybe that helps to transition from the pain to other parts of our experience. If you'd like more skills on how to be with unpleasant emotions, you can watch episode 3 that provides a couple of other specific tools. Okay, so that's actually all I recommend with loss. No real magical tool, just letting yourself have some time with it. Next, we'll discuss the financial stress. For this challenge, I cannot provide actual financial advice because I'm not at all trained in financial advising or consulting. So if you're looking for specific financial advice and how to manage your money and how to make budgets, I encourage you to seek support from someone qualified in that field. Some banks will provide a free financial consultation, so you might consider calling up your bank or a local bank or doing an online search to see if there are free consultation options in your area. I provided a link to an article that talks about some possible free resources in the notes. Also, sometimes there are family members or friends that might be financially savvy, so you might consider reaching out to help from those supports as well. What I am going to discuss is addressing the stress and worries that can sometimes accompany finances. Understandably, finances can quickly create some alarm in our minds and bodies because we do need to feel a level of financial stability in order to have safety and the ability to care for ourselves. So it can quickly become scary when our money is tight or we don't have enough of it, or we are spending a lot at once and maybe dipping into savings, like during this time of year when we might be traveling more or buying gifts for other people. The problem with this alarm in our minds and bodies is that it can lead to some habits that aren't necessarily helping us through the problem. Worrying is actually a thought habit that can come from stress and anxiety that makes us feel like we're doing something about it in a sense because we're thinking about it and worrying on it, when in reality, we aren't actually doing anything with that worry a lot of the time. And other habits might also be in place that might not be helpful but provide some temporary reward or comfort, like spending more money or isolating from others or eating a bunch of food that our body isn't asking for. There is an episode on the 10% Happier podcast with Dan Harris where he interviews Judson Brewer on November 28th of this year about anxiety, and he talks about these habit loops similar to what I'm describing. He advises to identify the habit loops, question what the habits are actually doing for you, and then taking a new step that breaks the habits, like being curious about what's going on in your experience of anxiety and worry, or creating a plan of action. This is essentially what I'm recommending with financial stress. Notice what habit loops are coming up when your financial stress is triggered. Identify what habits are helping and what habits aren't, and then come up with a new step. When it comes to financial stress specifically, a new step in the habit loop might entail creating or checking or adjusting a budget. If you already have a budget, then look it over. Sometimes you can get some reassurance that we'll be able to make it through the holidays financially. If you are looking at a budget and realizing you won't have enough money coming in for expenses, take specific action. Where might you have to set some difficult boundaries to stay within your budget? Do you see a path where you can spend the money on your expenses and then be able to cover it next month? How can you manage where you are? If you don't have a budget, create one. You can keep it really simple. Just note what money will come in for this month, note what you already spent on monthly bills and subscriptions, estimate how much your utilities cost, estimate how much you'll spend on food, and then estimate those additional holiday expenses of travel. Gas, plane or train or bus tickets, gifts for people, extra foods expenses. The basic idea in managing the stress is to actually do something with the stress as opposed to remaining stagnant and just having our head spin, which doesn't actually get us to a better place. Take action, make a spending plan, refer back to your spending plan, and make adjustments as needed. All right, the last section of this episode is family discord or just apprehension. People often identify all levels of dread when it comes to anticipation of family gatherings. You'll want to try to figure out for yourself what you are specifically dreading about the family gatherings. But one thing I hear often is political and religious differences that might be talked about and evokes emotions like frustration, anger, hurt, sadness, fear, anxiety, stress. Other stresses might be ongoing tensions due to past familial arguments, disagreements, or past family trauma, or just stress being around a bunch of people all at once when you're used to being in a group or a crowd of people, when you're not used to being in a group or crowd of people, or maybe just the general kind of social anxiety of being judged or having to present yourself in a specific way for this group of people. There are a ton of reasons that you might have some apprehension or dread for family gatherings. I encourage you to investigate your reasons, and you might use the questions discussed in episode 2 about apprehension of starting therapy. But in this episode, I want to provide a couple of ideas for dealing with political, religious differences and discussions, which also can help in possibly other tensions too. The reason these conversations can be so inflammatory is because we often have a lot of our own values attached to them, and we feel like an attack on our values when people are attacking your beliefs politically or religiously. It feels like an attack on our values. And so our emotions run really high. And it can feel very personal when we're interpreting the situation as though someone's attacking our values. Now, we might not be aware in the moment that this dynamic of our values being attacked is happening, and thus, as a person, we're being attacked. So we might not recognize that that is happening in the moment. But this is a common underpinning of the resulting behavior, which can often look like yelling, defending our stance, justifying our beliefs in an aggressive way, or fully shutting down and not engaging at all. These are self-protective behaviors that unfortunately create disengagement, a lack of understanding, and disconnection. It's like a winning mentality comes in. I have to win this discussion. When you take a step back, it's not actually that you have to or want to win, usually. Typically, what we want is to be understood. And the reason that being understood and heard is so important is because usually at the end of the day, what we really want is connection. So if we can remember that what we really want is to connect and understand, it can significantly change how you act and thus the course of the conversation. So what we can do with this idea is we can prime our brains to enter these conversations with a slightly different conscious intention to connect. And if we think about how to connect, one way to do that we already identified in recognizing our own needs is someone feeling heard and understood. We can't necessarily control other people fully hearing us to try to understand, but we can try to show others that we are truly listening to understand them. You might use clarifying questions. You might reflect back what they're saying to see if you're understanding. You might say, I understand where you're coming from. And your behaviors shifting in this discussion might shift their behaviors as well, because they might be less escalated and less defensive and more able to have a productive conversation too. So it might get you closer to being heard yourself, and even if not, you're at least building a stronger connection by hearing and understanding them, which is the actual intent of the conversation. So that's a lens that I wanted to provide. Now, I also want to talk about behavioral coping strategies that might help to prevent feeling escalated and defensive, or help if you're starting to feel escalated and or defensive. So first, have boundaries for yourself. You shouldn't have to share what you don't want to. If there's a certain topic you'd like to steer clear from, you can assert this in a respectful way. I'm not going to contribute to discussions around politics right now, so if that's what you and other people want to discuss, I'll take a break elsewhere. And then give yourself permission to walk away if your boundaries aren't being respected. For example, if someone continues to try to pressure you into a topic you said you didn't want to talk about, tell them you're walking away and walk away from them. I'm not going to be talking about this topic, so I'm walking away from this conversation. If you're catching early signals of escalation, slow down your breathing, breathe into your nostrils, and take longer breaths. This will help send the calming signals to your body. Also considering using other tools that can help create more of a pause between your immediate reaction and your response, like pressing your hands together, pressing your feet firmly into the ground, counting to 10. Find other stimuli to focus on if you're around tough conversations that you don't want to be a part of, like background noises, how your clothes feel on your skin, the warmth or coolness, different sights, different smells. And lastly, you can find other people to talk to or spend time with. Okay, so those are the different perspectives and tools I wanted to give you in preparation for this time of year. Remember to take what you want and leave what you don't. Also remember that these topics don't have quick, easy fixes, even though this video might try to make it seem that way. So I encourage you to seek further support as needed. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day.